this is going to be a bit of an unconventional headcanon fodder, basically telling you about a career that's sadly fallen into a bit of obscurity, and some weird-ass trivia about sequels. Nigel Kneale was born in 1922 and was from the Isle of Man, and he's one of the most influential TV writers of the 20th century. In a way, you might not know his name, but you are familiar with works inspired by his. After working as an actor, short story writer, and on radio, he began working for the BBC in the 50s, and his influence has never stopped. His work tended to fuse drama, horror, and science fiction, though he really didn't like science fiction. Anyway, one of his early successes was a TV adaptation of 1984, made in 1954, which not only made an overnight star of Peter Cushing, but was instrumental in making the book famous, and instigated the UK's first TV-based moral panic. There were hundreds of complaints, it was brought up in Parliament, a second playing of it was almost cancelled, and even the Queen and Prince Philip got involved, coming down on the side of the show, which is probably why they went along with the second showing. Later on, he wrote The Year of the Sex Olympics, which isn't just the greatest title in the history of everything, but depicted a future where constant exposure to violence and sex on TV had dulled the population into complacency. And a young TV executive decides to try something new. Reality TV. Yes, he satirized reality TV in the 60s while inventing it. Anyway, some people are put on an island with a bunch of hidden cameras. People raised in a bubble of technology and sensation, having to learn to live in the real world and die in it. All on camera. And they're not alone, there's a killer on the island with them. You could remake this today and market it as a clever take on found footage, reality TV, and slasher films. It's kind of tragic that the only version of it that still exists is in black and white, because although this was made before colour became standard, it was filmed in colour to help separate the artificial and natural worlds. You see, the artificial world of decadence and sensation was in gloriously weird colour, now gone, and the monochrome just blurs all of it into a grey mess. Luckily, we still have a couple of stills though. Look at that. It's like Yellow Submarine meets Tron. The Year of the Sex Olympics also starred a very young Brian Cox, so now you know where you recognise that guy from. Kneale had a tendency to mix the paranormal and sci-fi together, feeling they were really two names for basically the same thing. So he was also a pioneer in writing film and TV about the paranormal in a quote-unquote realistic way. Not supernatural, just undiscovered natural. And in the 70s, he wrote The Stone Tape. The Stone Tape was the example of the idea that ghosts aren't spirits, but recordings of people's emotions on certain surfaces that play back when conditions are just right. It deals with a team of scientists trying to solve how it all works, to recreate it, and maybe profit from the technology that could be derived from it. But naturally, they get themselves involved in Lovecraftian stuff beyond their comprehension.
Ooh, nasty.
And if the idea of a team of isolated science guys investigating the paranormal and biting off more than can chew sounds familiar, that'll be because The Stone Tape is one of the Kneale works that inspired John Carpenter's Prince of Darkness. The Stone Tape also lent its name to the actual paranormal hypothesis that ghosts are recorded in stone. The Stone Tape theory. It's not as good as being referenced by actual science, but it's a fun second prize. Kneale's most famous work, though, was the Quatermass experiment. Made in the early 50s, it dealt with an acerbic, fallible science genius defending the UK from alien threats. Alien threats that were sometimes partially his fault. In this case, a rocket returned to Earth with the first men in space, but two of them are missing and the third has become a monster bent on absorbing all life into itself. If that sounds like Doctor Who doing the plot to The Thing, good, because it is. But I don't want you to get the wrong idea. The Thing was based on Who Goes There, which predates Quatermass by over a decade, though I have no idea if Kneale ever read it. Quatermass was one of the earliest examples of adult sci-fi horror on television, and was one of the biggest TV events of the 50s in the UK. The audience went up every week over the course of its run, and by the final episode 5 million people watched, which doesn't sound too impressive, but that's more than the total population who actually had TVs. Legend says that pubs would empty out while it was on. I even remember older relatives telling me in hushed tones about it as a child. Truly mythic TV for a whole generation. I only wish it had been saved. Only 2 episodes of the 6 still exist, though it was adapted in 2005 into a live TV movie featuring David Tennant playing a doctor.
It's good to have you back, Doctor.
Quatermass.
Anyway, naturally there was a sequel. Slight tangent, but few shows have intros that go as hard as the first two Quatermasses. I mean, watch this. That's the 1950s equivalent of smacking people in the face with pure media. Anyway, the sequel, cleverly called Quatermass 2, was about aliens attempting to terraform the Earth. And it's good, but not quite as good as its sequel, Quatermass and the Pet, where an ancient alien spacecraft is discovered below London, and inside is the remains of a Martian. You see, in ancient history, Martians, an insectoid and deeply xenophobic race, drove their own planet to ecological collapse through their inbuilt crazed bigotry, and as a last measure to save their own race, they decided to claim the Earth. And they did this by altering the genetic code of humanity, making us like them. This is the origin of all human bigotry and our senseless violent impulses. The plan was that humanity would destroy itself before Mars died, and then they could just stroll in. They misjudged, though, and that was probably their last ship. The Martians also resemble demons, and are the origin for all human concepts of evil, the devil, demons, and etc. Anyway, the ship is leaking a gas, which activates anyone nearby's semi-dormant Martian tendencies, meaning the whole of London becomes a genocidal riot. And above it, in the rising gas and smoke, is the Martian devil.
I know writers who use subtext, and they're all cowards.
That was a cheap shot. Quatermass in the Pit is fucking awesome. 10 years later, Gene Roddenberry would be declared a genius for making two guys half black and white as a metaphor for racism, while Kneale was yelling that racism, like all bigotry, is literally inhuman and evil.
We are the Martians. If we cannot control the inheritance within us, this will be their second dead planet.
John Carpenter thought it was awesome too. It was the other thing he took inspiration from when writing Prince of Darkness. You might have noticed that it was written by one Martin Quatermass. The first three Quatermass stories were all massive influences on Carpenter, though not the TV versions. You see, they were all adapted into films by Hammer Horror, and those films' titles were simplified for the American market. The Quatermass Experiment became the Quatermass Experiment, Quatermass 2 became Quatermass 2, and Quatermass in the Pit was Quatermass in the Pit, because even Hammer Horror realized that Americans knew what a pit was. Probably. And now we get on to the invention of the numbered sequel. Quatermass 2 was the original film sequel to have the title and 2 beside it. Godfather Part 2 popularized the numbered sequel in film, but it didn't create it. And the Godfather films used the theatrical numbering of ... title Part 2. Think of Shakespeare's Henry V Parts 1, 2, and 3, rather than just a title and a number. Anyway, the 2 in Quatermass 2 the film wasn't invented whole cloth, because the second Quatermass TV serial was also called Quatermass 2, but written in Roman numerals because it was named after a rocket in the story, the Quatermass 2 rocket, like the V2. And rocketry naming conventions used Roman numerals, which means the typical sequel numbering system used in films, title of the film, 2, is not based on theatre, but rocketry. And I feel that fact alone is interesting enough to justify all that build-up. If you want to know more about Kneale, the guy was incredibly arrogant. But unlike most writers who are arrogant douches, Kneale was exactly as good as he thought he was. I mean, he turned down a chance to write for the X-Files at the height of his 90s success because he thought it was crap. And he told them so. Which I feel is the exact point where dickish meets legendary. He was convinced, though, to write the first draft for Halloween 3, after watching Halloween 1 and 2 and insulting them to John Carpenter's face. Frankly, it all goes to show how highly Carpenter regarded him. In the end, not much of Halloween 3 was Kneale's work, the main plot was his, but the rest was heavily rewritten. I've not read the original script, but I'm guessing it's to its detriment. Anyway, I've only scratched the surface, but that was Nigel Kneale, as influential as he was brilliant, as he was arrogant. He died in 2006, and without him, the world of TV and film would be very different today.